day 7 of the Diddy trial. So much happened today. Cassie took the stand for a second full day of direct testimony. Testimony being, she was asked questions by the prosecution for another full day. The defense is going to get their chance to cross-examine her starting tomorrow. Today, for the prosecution, was all about connections of Diddy to the freak-offs and of the power that he allegedly held over her. As part of that, what the defense is trying to set up is some sort of an argument that she in some way consented. She could have left at any time. That's what the defense is saying. There were a lot of comments yesterday saying that Derek and I were somehow signing on to this idea that a woman who continues to go back to an abusive boyfriend is somehow consenting. Not at all the case. As a matter of fact, there's a ton of scientific literature out there suggests just the opposite, that frequently a woman who's a victim of domestic violence, of this kind of violence, of sexual violence, will nevertheless stay with her abuser through some sort of an emotional attachment to that person, despite the fact they are not consenting to the activity at all. We're simply doing, what we're doing here is laying out what the prosecution is going to say and laying out what the defense is going to say, because the defense, again, Derek, just needs that one witness, that one juror who thinks like a troglodyte and says, well, she could have left at any time, and the fact she didn't leave, didn't go to the police, makes her a willing participant in all this, and therefore not guilty.
That's right, and we're trying to be balanced in our approach. We're telling you what the prosecutors need to establish to prove the elements of the offenses that they've charged Diddy with, but we're also going to tell you how the defense plans to poke holes in that theory, and in doing so, there's no endorsement one way or another. The prosecution has the burden. That's just the way criminal trials work. And Diddy's team only needs to convince one juror to say, well, you didn't prove that element, and he gets a mistrial and he's off the hook. If he convinces all of them, he's acquitted. So we're trying to lay out how this will play out without any sort of thumb on the scale in one direction or another.
As balanced as we're trying to be, the testimony today by Cassie was some of the most damning trial testimony I have ever heard in all the trials that we've been following in our careers. She just simply put at his feet a level of control, abuse, rape, physical, emotional violence that paints him out to be a true monster. And we haven't even talked about the videotape.
That's right. And that was a real centerpiece of her testimony. She discussed an incident on a plane flight.
Yes.
During this flight, she says she was sitting next to Diddy at some point, and he took out an iPad and showed her on his iPad videos of past freak-offs. And in her mind...
And these videos, sorry, just to interrupt, these videos all featured her having sex with other men and doing all sorts of sort of
degrading
acts. Yeah.
Yes. And she, at this point, had already said that she was trying to communicate that she didn't want to do freak-offs anymore. She had said that she had said to Diddy at some point, delete the videos. And him showing her that videos existed on his iPad, she interpreted it as a threat to release those videos, to subsequently send those out into the world, humiliate her, destroy her career, embarrass her to her family, and so forth. She says after that plane flight, they got off, they went to dinner in New York, and during that dinner, Diddy said, I would like to do a freak-off. Cassie, and the language she used was she felt trapped at this point. And the way prosecutors are trying to set this up is that he trapped her by the implicit threat that if she didn't continue in this lifestyle with him, which included freak-offs, he would embarrass her by releasing these tapes. That's what the prosecutors are trying to establish.
Defense is going to say, well, she never specifically tied it up and said that, but for the, that unless you do more freak-offs, I'm going to release the tapes. I don't think that was quite the testimony.
That's
but
right.
Nevertheless, you're creating this entire atmosphere that he was so physically abusive with her, and showed her these tapes.
Such a psychological hold on her at this point.
And with these tapes, she would say, I want you to delete that. He would say, yeah, I've deleted them all, clean. I don't have my iCloud on. That's clean as well. And then 2 weeks later, she would do something that would upset him, and he'd say, do it again, and here's the video. And she wouldn't have deleted it. He lied to her, saying, according to Cassie, lied to her, saying he deleted him when he in fact hadn't.
Yeah, and to your point, part of Diddy's strategy here is going to be that, yes, there was violence in our relationship. He can't get around that 2016 video in the Intercontinental Hotel. So part of his strategy seems to be, yes, we had fights. I do have a temper. It gets the best of me. But these fights weren't about keeping her in the sexual hold of these freak-offs. What they were about was, in the Intercontinental, we had an argument about a cell phone, and that was just a dispute that was unrelated to us continuing in these freak-offs. I never held her against her will for these freak-offs. When I said, here are these videos, I was upset about her taking drugs from me. And this was a fight that
dating somebody else.
dating someone else. I was a very jealous person, but none of it had to do with forcing her into continuing to participate in freak-offs. So there seemed to be sort of trying to puncture holes in each of these episodes as unrelated to him sex trafficking her.
Good luck with that.
Good luck. It's also not how many humans communicate. You don't really say, I will do X if you don't do Y. Only in movies do you see it so cleanly laid out. A lot of times people just know what a threat is. You know it when you see it. You'd be like, it'd be a pity if these videos got out, wouldn't it? That's a threat too.
So she testified over and over again that as part of the freak-offs, he would physically abuse her, left her with black eyes. When he was upset with her outside of the freak-offs, he would physically abuse her, beat her. One day, excuse me, she said she wasn't going to go to a party. He then shows up at the party, and she showed up as well. He caught her there, basically. And she knew right away she was going to get beaten, so she ran. Later that night, he comes to the hotel, breaks in the door, beats the hell out of her. He just, this pattern of unbelievable,
rage.
Not just the physical abuse, the psychological abuse that he was perpetrating on her, something.
Now, I want to get into something that was also part of this testimony that will be interesting to see how it plays out. This is the end of their relationship, Jason. What did she testify as to the last time they had, 2 years after the hotel incident in 2018?
Yeah.
What happened there?
So 2 years after the relationship, she has started to date another man. They've gone their separate ways.
Who she's now married to.
Who she's eventually, this man becomes her husband. They go out to dinner. Diddy and Cassie go out to dinner, just the two of them at a public Malibu restaurant. She says it was a closing conversation. That's the way she described it. That's what she thought it was going to be. He drives her back to her house to drop her off. He then gets out of his car, follows into her house, and she says rapes her on the floor of her house. Incredibly damning testimony once again.
Very upsetting, although he is not in this federal prosecution being charged with rape.
That would be a state court crime,
right.
and you know, that's 7 years ago. I'm not saying it's outside of the statute of limitations, but you need evidence. There's no evidence for that beyond her testimony, and that's a hard thing to base a rape case on. And again, that would be a state court prosecution. But then something else happens where she says the defense asks, "Did you ever see him again? And did you ever have sex with him again?" She said, "Yes, I had sex with him one more time, and it was voluntary."
Right.
Now, again, this goes back to Derek and I calling balls and strikes here. The defense is going to run with this testimony that she says all along that she didn't want to be with him, that he's this monster, that she objected to the freak-offs, that he violently rapes her in 2018, but she goes back again and has consensual sex with him.
Now, there are explanations. People can be in the psychological throes even years later. Someone can trigger you and make you feel in fear. But his lawyers are going to have a field day with this, because at this point in her life, it seemed as though she had overcome those enough to escape, start dating seriously another man, Alex Fine, who became her husband, and nevertheless subsequently had consensual voluntary sex with Diddy. It sort of breaks the chain of the psychological abuse that she was in earlier. I'm not saying that she couldn't have been triggered and that Diddy, just the sight of him, could have caused her to feel fear. That can certainly be true. It's true of many battered women. But it will be a more difficult thing for her to explain once Diddy's lawyers have a chance to talk about that.
I have to tell you, before I had heard that testimony, it was a lot of commentators online talking about it's hard to see where the defense goes with this line of questioning. You have to find such narrow windows for them to strike, because her testimony, and everybody in the courtroom, we're not in the courtroom, we're just reading the transcript or the trial testimony. Everybody in the courtroom says that she was the most compelling witness there could have possibly been. She seemed authentic, truthful, honest, composed, had emotion when emotion would have been, anybody would have had emotion, but otherwise was terrific. This piece of testimony at the end, I think, was a bit of a gift to the defense, because, again, to your point, it definitely does not mean that he did not do all these horrible things to her, but it gives the defense something to point out to that lone juror, that one juror who's looking for a reason not to prosecute. here might be that little
She
tether.
left the door open ajar a
Yeah.
bit, is how I think of it. I mean, she has basically had a great 2 days of testimony from the prosecution's standpoint. I do think it's quite effective. There's sort of gestalt to it all, right? Even if you believe that Diddy is able to poke holes in individual parts of this,
Such a good
the
point.
sum of
Yeah.
her testimony and how it lands on jurors, I think, is going to be very, very hard for
So
Diddy to overcome.
we lawyers get caught up in the picayune matters of what is the true definition of consent? What is the true definition of coercion? And the jury will certainly be asked to find those picayune distinctions. But in general, what they have here is more than enough evidence to convict. And if they hate him enough, they can do it. They can hang their hat on the legalities of it all. The defense wants to make it impossible for them to do that, but it's going to be very, very difficult. So what you have here, to your point about gestalt, about atmosphere, about this, or they described, Cassie's testimony has described an unmitigating monster. And there's no
hard to shake that
escaping
sense.
It's going to be hard to shake that sense unless they can really get after her on cross. It seems hard to know how they would do that.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. He's got very skilled lawyers. Cross does start to feel differently. If it's very effective, you can start to question people's credibility and so forth. As we've said, the last 2 days of testimony have not been softballs. It's been very emotional for her, but she has been allowed to lay out her narrative. That's what prosecutors do. They set up questions and let you talk. When you're crossed, it's a very different situation on the stand.
I just wanted to give one more quote, and then we can get to your questions. When asked by the prosecution why she stayed with him, she said, and there's a quote, "I feared for my career. I feared for my family. It's horrible. It's disgusting. No one should do that to anyone." I just thought that was incredibly powerful.
It's been an incredibly powerful 2 days of testimony. Let's get to some questions. So Savannah asks, why is everyone focusing on Cassie's ability to leave? The hiring of escorts is already enough to elicit the sex trafficking charges.
100% correct. There are
Great
3
point.
charges here, one of which is the bringing across state lines process. And the reason state lines is important here, it's a federal crime. It would be a state crime if it was just within. If you go ahead and pick up a prostitute on a street corner, pay them, that's a state crime. If you bring them across state lines for the purpose of sex, that's a federal crime. It's going to be very easy to prove that crime.
That is one of the counts. Transportation to engage in prostitution. That's the easiest count that they have.
It also probably doesn't come with much jail time, if any.
Exactly.
Right.
It's the least important of the charges they have to. You just have to say you crossed state lines, you knowingly hired escorts for the purposes of sex.
I don't even think
that's enough.
Diddy's going to even put up a defense to that one crime.
That doesn't put you in jail, in prison for life.
It really does. He's already served. What has he served? He's been in jail for what, prison for what, 9 months, 6 to 9 months now. He's been serving.
That's the type of offense.
That's time served. That's time
Yes.
served. In order to get the kind of up to life in prison, they'll never get that no matter what. But the decade or 2 in prison, what they really need is to get into the sex trafficking charges,
by force, fraud, or coercion. That's why they're focusing on Cassie, because when you hire a prostitute, you don't have to do so by force, fraud, or coercion. They're doing it
for money,
transactionally,
that's
for money,
which is a different crime.
But for Cassie, she's key to the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion.
And the issue here is by coercion, right? They coerced her into this sex trafficking operation. And then the other element of it, did he do it with other people? They're laying the groundwork with the various employees. But again, very good question, Savannah. But the answer is that's just one tiny bit of a crime. That's really a time.
If they only get that conviction, that's a loss.
That's a loss, right? Claire Owen says, my husband just told me about the court asked Cassie to remain seated so the jurors didn't know she was pregnant. It wasn't the court who did that. That was the defense counsel asked that when the jurors are marched in and put in the jury box, that the witness, Cassie, would already be seated so they wouldn't necessarily be able to focus on the fact she's pregnant.
I think that's a fair give.
The court overruled that, though. And the court said, no, I'm sorry, she's going to walk in like any other witness does. And so she did, in fact, walk into court in front of the juror.
But I thought it was a good move of Diddy's attorneys to say, look, she can testify, but she can't stand up and look angelic with her pregnant belly. That might be prejudicial to my client. That's why they made the ask, and the judge ruled as they did. And it's a fair ruling as well, but I thought it was a cagey move by them.
Peace World Lord says, I don't understand how Cassie is taking the stand when her lawsuit was settled the next day after it was filed. Difference between civil and criminal cases, right?
Yes, you can settle a civil lawsuit if she is compelled to appear for a criminal prosecution by subpoena, which she is. She's a subpoenaed witness. She has to participate. She has to under penalty. She can sign that agreement and have a private settlement. And
she can be cross-examined on that settlement.
And she can be cross-examined about it as well. But she can't turn down, the justice system wouldn't work.
And by the way, so we remember the Kobe Bryant case back in 2004 when he was accused of rape in Colorado. He settled with the complaining witness, the victim, and the alleged victim. settled with her, and then she, as part of that settlement, refused to cooperate. And when they tried to subpoena her, she said, "You can subpoena all me want. I'm not going to give you the testimony I want." So the prosecution's case fell apart. Cassie has not done that. She has been a willing participant in this. She has gone to the prosecution and given them full statements. The questions they're asking her now, they know the answers to. They have rehearsed these with Cassie there at the prosecutor's office to get this testimony perfect. She has been a willing participant in this prosecution.
Could her willing participation in the prosecution jeopardize whatever money she got from Diddy? That's an open question, but think of the optics of him suing her after this.
Unlikely.
Very unlikely.
Emily Burton, will the prosecution bring in Diddy's former employees who Cassie is implicating? What kind of risk might they be taking in doing so? So the prosecution could call them. They, of course, have a right, a Fifth Amendment right, not to testify in
to the extent that would incriminate themselves.
To the extent that it would
criminal
incriminate
enterprise.
themselves, right? They are also not, at this point, indicted, so they have a lot of risk. They could, in fact, be indicted unless they reach a deal with prosecutors to testify against Diddy.
Oh, I imagine some of them will.
Yes.
I imagine some of them will. They have a racketeering conspiracy charge against him, and part of proving a criminal enterprise is that Diddy was the center of this enterprise and had employees doing his bidding, making the criminal enterprise. A lot of those people don't want to be prosecuted, so they're going to cooperate.
Last point, there's on this issue, there's a woman named Mia who's a former employee of Diddy's who is on the witness list. She is labeled as a victim of Diddy. She is going to testify. Former employee, also victimized, also allegedly. This is apparently what she's going to testify, according to prosecutors. Testify that she witnessed Diddy being physically violent towards Cassie. She may have witnessed the freak-offs. She felt for Cassie. She tried to reach out to Cassie and help her. So this is somebody who Diddy tried to coerce into sort of this RICO conspiracy case, this enterprise, this criminal enterprise. So Mia, we're probably going to see her, I don't think tomorrow, because I think Diddy's counsel's cross of Cassie's going to take it the full day. But I'm guessing by Friday, that's going to be the prosecution's next witness is going to be this woman.
And again, a lot of these employees may be under NDAs. Presumably, when you work for Diddy, you're under an NDA. That's out the window. There's crime, fraud exceptions. They are allowed to sort of work with the prosecution towards convicting Diddy.
All right, guys, more to come tomorrow.